Wife of 18 years cheats with 20-year-old guy upstairs, husband comes home and beats him. Husband hired the best divorce lawyer in the town to punish his wife and show her place. Joseph's heart pounded in his chest as he silently pushed open the front door of the home he had shared with Mathilde for nearly 2 decades. The house was suspiciously quiet, with only the faint sound of music drifting from the upstairs bedroom. He had returned early from his business trip, planning to surprise his wife and maybe even take her out for a spontaneous dinner date. As he made his way upstairs, each step felt heavier, an ominous prelude to what he was about to discover. The door to their bedroom was ajar, and through the sliver of space, Joseph's world came crashing down. There, in the room that had witnessed the highs and lows of their marriage, was Mathilde with a young man he faintly recognized as their neighbor's college-aged son. Rage coursed through Joseph's veins, a fiery mix of betrayal and disbelief. The young man scrambled out of the bed in a panic, stuttering apologies as he hurried past Joseph, who stood frozen, his gaze locked on Mathilde. She sat there, disheveled and wide-eyed, her mouth opening and closing as if words had abandoned her. The silence was deafening. Joseph felt as though he was drowning in a sea of emotions, each wave crashing over him with brutal force. He wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he turned and left the room, the image of Mathilde's betrayal etched into his mind. Downstairs, Joseph found himself pacing the living room, each step a futile attempt to outrun his thoughts. How long had it been going on? Had he been so blind? The trust and love he had for Mathilde, once unshakable, now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a chasm of hurt and anger. Mathilde's footsteps echoed down the stairs, a tentative approach that Joseph neither welcomed nor rejected. She stood there, a few feet away, her eyes brimming with tears. "Joseph, I can explain," she began, her voice a mere whisper. "Explain?" Joseph's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth it once held for her. "How do you explain this, Mathilde? 18 years, and for what? For a fling with a kid?" Mathilde reached out, but Joseph recoiled. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "Hurt me?" Joseph laughed, a sound that held no humor. "You've done more than that. You've broken everything. Our marriage, our family, it's all a lie." The conversation that followed was a blur of accusations and pleas. Mathilde's remorse battled against Joseph's disillusionment, but the damage was irrevocable. As the night wore on, the once warm and loving home felt more like a battleground of broken promises. Joseph didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study, surrounded by the remnants of a life he thought he knew. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, he made his decision. He would file for divorce, but not just any divorce. He would use his financial expertise and connections to ensure that Mathilde was left with as little as possible. This was more than a divorce, it was retribution. A way to regain control, to punish Mathilde for her betrayal. As the sun rose, casting a new day over the world, Joseph's path was clear. His heart might be shattered, but his resolve was stronger than ever. In the early light of dawn, the world outside seemed oblivious to the turmoil that had upended Joseph's life. The decision he had made in the darkness of his study now set in motion a day that would mark the beginning of a bitter legal battle. Joseph, sitting at his desk, scrolled through his contacts, his finger hovering over the name of a renowned divorce attorney, Martin Reed. With a deep breath, Joseph dialed the number. The call was brief, an appointment was set for the same day. As he ended the call, Joseph felt a sense of grim determination settle over him. He was about to embark on a path that would change the course of several lives, but his resolve was unwavering. At Martin Reed's office, Joseph was greeted with a professional warmth that did little to ease the cold knot of revenge in his stomach. Martin was a man in his late 50s, with a reputation for being a ruthless advocate for his clients' interests. His office was adorned with accolades and certificates, a testament to his success in the legal field. "Mr. Joseph Allen," Martin began, his voice smooth and confident, divorce proceedings can be complex, especially when substantial assets are involved. What exactly are you looking to achieve? Joseph's reply was measured, his voice betraying none of the emotional turmoil he felt. I want a divorce, and I want to ensure that my wife is left with as little as possible. She has betrayed me, and I intend to protect what I've worked hard for. Martin regarded Joseph with a shrewd gaze. Understood. However, you should be aware that the courts tend to favor a fair and equitable division of assets. Joseph leaned forward, his eyes hard. I'm not concerned about what's fair. I've been in finance for years, I know there are ways to protect assets. I'm willing to explore every legal avenue available. Martin nodded slowly, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Very well. There are certainly strategies we can employ. Offshore accounts, trusts, and other financial maneuvers can complicate the division of assets. However, these actions require precision and discretion. The discussion that followed delved into the intricacies of asset protection. Joseph provided Martin with detailed information about his finances, including investments, properties, and business ventures. Martin listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, his mind already formulating a strategy. As Joseph left Martin's office, a plan began to take shape. He knew that the coming months would be a labyrinth of legal procedures and financial maneuvering. He was prepared to do whatever it took to emerge victorious, even if it meant dragging Mathilde through financial hardship. Back home, the house felt more like a shell, void of the warmth and love it once held. Mathilde had moved to stay with a friend, leaving Joseph alone with his thoughts. He sat in the quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock, a reminder of the relentless march of time. As he pondered his next moves, Joseph realized that this battle was not just about money or revenge, it was about regaining control over a life that had been thrown into chaos. The stakes were high, and the path ahead fraught with moral and ethical dilemmas. But for Joseph, the course was set. He would see this through, no matter the cost. The courtroom felt like an alien world to Mathilde, its solemnity a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed her life. Sitting across from her, Joseph appeared as a stranger, his face an impassive mask. As the proceedings began, Mathilde felt a chill of apprehension. She knew Joseph was planning something, but the extent of it was still a mystery. Joseph's lawyer, Martin Reed, was the first to speak. His voice was calm and authoritative, outlining Joseph's contributions to their finances and painting Mathilde as a reckless spender, a narrative that twisted the knife deeper into her already wounded heart. Mathilde's lawyer, a young but passionate woman named Sarah, countered with arguments about Mathilde's role as a supportive spouse and mother, emphasizing her non-financial contributions to their marriage. As the arguments flew back and forth, Mathilde's mind wandered to the days when she and Joseph had been a team, tackling life's challenges together. She remembered his laughter, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, and the gentle way he used to look at her. Those memories now seemed like relics from another lifetime. The focus shifted to the division of assets. Martin presented a detailed account of Joseph's finances, but Mathilde could sense something was amiss. The numbers didn't add up. There were properties she didn't recognize and accounts that seemed conveniently depleted. It was clear to her that Joseph had been moving assets around, creating a financial smokescreen. Sarah tried to challenge the discrepancies, but Martin skillfully navigated around her objections, citing legal complexities and privacy concerns. Mathilde felt a growing sense of helplessness. Joseph's plan was unfolding just as he had intended, and she was caught in its unforgiving gears. As the day wore on, the legal jargon and financial details swirled around Mathilde like a tempest, confusing and disorienting her. She felt small and insignificant in the face of such calculated legal maneuvering. The court adjourned for the day, leaving Mathilde with a heavy sense of dread about what was to come. That evening, alone in her friend's guest room, Mathilde reflected on her situation. She had known that the divorce would be difficult, but she had underestimated Joseph's determination for revenge. The realization that she might be left with nothing after the divorce was a sobering thought. She had been dependent on Joseph for financial stability, and now that safety net was being ruthlessly pulled away. Mathilde's thoughts turned to their children, who were staying with Joseph. She missed them terribly and worried about the impact of this battle on them. She longed to shield them from the ugliness of the proceedings, but she felt powerless to do so. As she lay in bed, the events of the courtroom replaying in her mind, Mathilde realized that this battle was about more than just money. It was a struggle for dignity, for fairness, and for a chance to rebuild her life. She resolved to fight back, not just for herself, but for her children's future. The next morning, Mathilde met with Sarah, her resolve strengthened. They discussed new strategies to counter Joseph's financial maneuvers and to bring to light his deliberate attempts to leave her destitute. Mathilde knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but she was ready to stand her ground. The fight for her rights had just begun, and she was determined to see it through to the end. Mathilde sat alone in the small, sparsely furnished apartment she had rented since the separation. The walls were bare, the atmosphere starkly different from the warm, lively home she once shared with Joseph and their children. She gazed out of the window, lost in thought, the city lights blurring into a cascade of distant stars. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Joseph's tactics in the courtroom had been devastatingly effective. The accounts and assets she thought were part of their shared life had been meticulously shielded or moved, leaving her with a fraction of what she had expected. Her lawyer, Sarah, was doing her best, but the legal battle was like fighting a phantom, elusive and ever-changing. Mathilde thought back to the early years of their marriage, how she had supported Joseph through his career, putting her own aspirations on hold to focus on their family. Now, the irony of her situation was a bitter pill to swallow. Her dependence on Joseph had become her greatest vulnerability. Her phone rang, snapping her back to the present. It was Sarah, her voice cautiously optimistic. "Mathilde, I've been going over Joseph's financial disclosures again. There are inconsistencies we can challenge, but it's going to be a tough fight." Mathilde sighed, a mix of hope and trepidation. "What are our chances, honestly?" Sarah paused before replying. "It's going to be difficult. He's covered his tracks well. But I believe we have a shot. We just need to stay focused and persistent." The call ended with Mathilde feeling a renewed sense of determination. She couldn't let Joseph's actions dictate the rest of her life. She had to fight for what she deserved, not just for her own sake, but for the dignity and security it represented. In the days that followed, Mathilde threw herself into the legal battle with a newfound vigor. She spent hours with Sarah, reviewing documents and strategizing. They explored every legal avenue to uncover and challenge Joseph's financial manipulations. But the struggle wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. Mathilde grappled with feelings of guilt and remorse over her affair. She knew her actions had played a part in their marriage's downfall, but the punishment Joseph was exacting felt disproportionately cruel. The emotional toll of the divorce was also affecting her relationship with her children. The few times she saw them, she could sense the confusion and hurt in their eyes. They were old enough to understand that their parents were in conflict, but too young to grasp the complexities of the situation. Mathilde ached to explain, to apologize, to make them understand, but words failed her. As the weeks turned into months, the strain of the legal battle began to wear on Mathilde. The once confident and vibrant woman found herself battling bouts of anxiety and despair. However, in her darkest moments, she found an inner strength she didn't know she possessed. She began to rebuild her life, piece by piece, drawing on reserves of resilience and independence. Mathilde started exploring job opportunities, determined to regain financial independence. She also began attending a support group, where she found solace in the stories of others who had faced similar challenges. It was a slow and painful process, but with each passing day, Mathilde found herself growing stronger, more self-reliant. The battle for her financial rights was far from over, but Mathilde was no longer the same person who had sat helplessly in the courtroom months ago. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. The day the divorce was finalized, Joseph sat in his car outside the courthouse, the document declaring his marriage to Mathilde officially over resting on the passenger seat. He had won, just as he had planned. Mathilde was left with minimal financial support, her life a stark contrast to the comfort and security she had known. But as Joseph stared at the courthouse, a sense of emptiness gnawed at him. The drive home was a blur. His thoughts were a tumultuous sea, waves of victory clashing with undercurrents of doubt and regret. When he arrived, the house was quiet, a silent testament to the cost of his revenge. Joseph wandered through the rooms, each one echoing with memories of laughter, arguments, and moments of shared love. Now, they were just empty spaces, hollowed out by his relentless pursuit of retribution. In the study, Joseph sat down and let out a long, weary sigh. He had spent so much energy and focus on the legal battle, using his financial expertise to ensure Mathilde's downfall. But in the quiet aftermath, the sweetness of victory he had anticipated tasted more like ash. He thought of Mathilde, not the woman who had betrayed him, but the woman he had fallen in love with. He remembered her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the countless days and nights they had shared dreams and plans for the future. In his quest for revenge, had he lost sight of the person she once was to him? The person he had vowed to cherish and protect? Joseph's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his children returning from school. Their voices, once the heart of the home, now sounded distant, like echoes from a life he had willingly shattered. As he greeted Mia and Ethan, he saw the confusion and hurt in their eyes. They were trying to adjust to the new normal, but the scars were evident. Joseph realized that his actions hadn't just punished Mathilde, they had wounded the very people he loved most. In the following weeks, Joseph found himself reflecting more on his actions. He recognized the bitterness that had consumed him and the impact it had on everyone around him. He began to understand that his pursuit of revenge, while momentarily satisfying, had cost him dearly, not just in terms of his relationship with Mathilde but also the emotional well-being of his children and his own inner peace. Meanwhile, Mathilde was rebuilding her life with resilience. Despite the financial hardships, she found strength in her newfound independence. She secured a job, and though it was a far cry from the life of comfort she had known, it gave her a sense of purpose. Her relationship with her children, strained at first, began to heal as they saw her efforts to create a stable and loving environment for them. Months later, Joseph reached out to Mathilde. They met at a cafe, a neutral ground laden with the weight of their shared past. The conversation was tentative at first, but as they talked, there was a sense of mutual understanding and regret for the pain they had caused each other and their children. The meeting ended with no dramatic resolution, no rekindling of lost love, but with a shared commitment to co-parent their children with respect and kindness. As Joseph drove back home, he felt a sense of closure. The battle was over, and it was time to focus on healing and moving forward. For both Joseph and Mathilde, the end of their marriage marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the lessons of the past shaped a future built on self-reflection, forgiveness, and hope. After 23 years of marriage, a wife convinced her husband to agree to an open marriage to get more freedom. She embarks on several affairs. Instant regret just after her husband sent her divorce papers. Crystal sat at the dining table, her fingers tracing the patterns on the tablecloth, lost in a storm of thoughts. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, a sound that seemed to echo her growing restlessness. She and Jan had built a life together filled with comfort and stability, yet now, after 23 years, she found herself yearning for something more, something undefined. Jan entered the room, his presence as familiar as the furniture that adorned their home. He smiled at her, a warm, loving smile that had once made her heart flutter. Now, it only deepened the chasm of her inner conflict. "Is everything okay, Crystal?" Jan asked, sensing her unease. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a tumult of emotions. "Jan, we need to talk," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Jan's expression shifted to concern as he sat down beside her. "What's on your mind?" Crystal took a deep breath, gathering the courage to voice her thoughts. I've been feeling confined lately. Our life, it's become so predictable, so routine. I love you, but I need more freedom. Jan's brow furrowed, a sense of dread creeping into his heart. Freedom? What do you mean? I've been thinking about us, about our marriage. What if we considered an open marriage? The words, once spoken, seemed to hang heavily in the air. Jan recoiled as if struck. The concept was alien to him, a stark contrast to his beliefs about marriage and commitment. Open marriage? Crystal, where is this coming from? I don't know, Jan. I just feel like I'm missing out on something, like there's a part of me that's still unexplored. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to lose myself, she explained, her voice laced with desperation. Jan sat in stunned silence. The idea of sharing Crystal with others was inconceivable. He had always viewed their marriage as a sacred bond, exclusive and unwavering. Yet, the fear of losing her completely was even more terrifying. Crystal, I don't know if I can do that, he admitted, his voice strained. Our marriage, it means everything to me. The thought of you with someone else, it's unbearable. Crystal reached for his hand, seeking to bridge the growing gap between them. I understand how hard this is, Jan. But I feel trapped. I need to explore these feelings, or I fear they'll consume me. Can't we try? For the sake of our marriage? Jan looked into her eyes, searching for the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had built his life around. The idea of an open marriage clashed with every fiber of his being, yet the thought of losing Crystal was even more agonizing. After a long, heart-wrenching silence, Jan nodded slowly, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. Okay, Crystal. We'll try it your way. But I'm not sure how I'll cope. Crystal squeezed his hand, a mix of relief and guilt swirling within her. She had stepped onto a path unknown, driven by a desire for freedom, unaware of the cost that lay ahead. As they sat there, the unspoken void between them grew wider, a silent harbinger of the turmoil that was to come. The decision to embrace an open marriage had been made, but the reality of it settled uneasily on Crystal. She found herself on a path she had longed for, yet the journey was more daunting than she had anticipated. Jan, trying to mask his discomfort, had retreated into a quiet acceptance, his once vibrant demeanor now subdued. Crystal's first steps into this new world were tentative. She met new people, experiencing a thrill that had been missing in her life. Each encounter was a mixture of excitement and guilt, a cocktail of emotions that left her both exhilarated and drained. Meanwhile, Jan, unable to voice his growing despair, threw himself into his work. The long hours at the office became his refuge, a place where he could escape the reality of his wife's explorations. In the evenings, he took up painting, a hobby he had abandoned years ago, finding solace in the strokes of his brush. As Crystal navigated through her new experiences, she couldn't help but notice the growing distance between her and Jan. The conversations that once flowed easily were now strained, filled with unspoken words and hidden feelings. The laughter that had once filled their home was replaced by a stifling silence. Despite the freedom she had yearned for, Crystal found herself grappling with a sense of emptiness. The connections she made were fleeting, lacking the depth and comfort she shared with Jan. With each new encounter, she was reminded of what she was risking, of the love and companionship that had been a constant in her life. Jan, on his part, struggled to cope with the new dynamics of their marriage. He missed the intimacy and trust they once shared. The sight of Crystal getting ready for another evening out was a dagger to his heart. He longed to express his feelings, to tell her how much he missed her, how much he wanted things to go back to the way they were. But fear of pushing her further away kept him silent. As the weeks turned into months, the chasm between them widened. Crystal's adventures, once a source of curiosity and excitement, began to lose their allure. The realization that she was jeopardizing the most meaningful relationship in her life started to dawn on her. One evening, as Crystal returned home from another unfulfilling encounter, she found Jan in his studio, lost in his painting. She watched him for a moment, admiring the intensity and passion with which he worked. It was a side of him she hadn't seen in a long time, a side she suddenly missed. Jan, she began tentatively, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, his expression one of surprise and guarded hope. Yes, Crystal. She took a step closer, her heart heavy with words she struggled to find. I've been thinking, about us, about everything. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing anymore. Jan put down his brush, his eyes searching hers. I've been thinking too, he admitted. I miss us, Crystal. I miss what we had. Tears welled up in Crystal's eyes as the magnitude of her actions hit her. She had sought freedom, but at what cost? The man she loved, the life they had built together, was slipping away, and the journey she had embarked on suddenly felt lonely and misguided. As they stood there, a fragile hope flickering between them, the daunting task of bridging the gap they had created loomed ahead. But for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the love that still lingered in the unspoken void. The shift in their relationship was subtle yet undeniable. Crystal's journey into her newfound freedom continued, but the initial thrill had begun to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of emptiness. Jan, on the other hand, found himself in a state of constant internal conflict, torn between his love for Crystal and his inability to accept the new terms of their marriage. Crystal's encounters, once a source of exhilaration, now left her feeling increasingly hollow. The conversations and connections with others paled in comparison to the depth and history she shared with Jan. She began to question her pursuit of freedom, wondering if the price she was paying was too high. Jan's world, too, had grown darker. He watched Crystal's continued explorations with a heavy heart. The trust and intimacy that had been the foundation of their marriage seemed to crumble a little more with each passing day. His art, once a refuge, could no longer shield him from the pain of his reality. One rainy evening, as Crystal prepared for another night out, Jan's feelings boiled over. "Crystal, do you have to go?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of desperation and resignation. Crystal paused, taken aback by the raw emotion in Jan's voice. I thought you were okay with this," she replied, her own voice faltering. "I thought I could be," Jan admitted, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "But it's tearing me apart, Crystal. I can't stand the thought of you with someone else. I miss you, even when you're right here." Crystal's heart ached at his words. She saw the man she loved, vulnerable and hurt, a stark contrast to the strong, composed Jan she had always known. She realized how much her quest for freedom had cost them both. The evening out lost its appeal. She cancelled her plans and sat down with Jan, opening up about her own doubts and fears. For the first time in months, they talked openly, sharing their feelings and the pain they had both been harboring. As they talked, Crystal saw glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had built a life with. She remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, the comfort of their togetherness. The realization that she was risking it all for fleeting moments of excitement shook her to the core. Jan, too, found a measure of relief in their conversation. Expressing his pain and hearing Crystal's doubts brought a sense of validation to his feelings. He understood her need for exploration, but he couldn't suppress his longing for the way things used to be. In the days that followed, a new dynamic began to emerge between them. The distance that had grown was now acknowledged, and in its acknowledgement, there was a chance for healing. Crystal began to scale back her outings, increasingly aware of the cost of her freedom. However, the damage that had been done was not easily repaired. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. The shadow of Crystal's actions loomed large, casting doubts on their future. Jan's pain, though slightly eased, still lingered, a reminder of the wounds that had been inflicted. As they navigated this new phase of their relationship, the uncertainty of their future hung in the balance. The path to reconciliation was unclear, but for the first time, there was a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find their way back to each other. The weeks following their heartfelt conversation saw Crystal and Jan attempting to navigate the turbulent waters of their strained relationship. Crystal, recognizing the depth of her husband's pain, had curtailed her explorations, but the shadow of her past actions loomed large in their home. Jan, though appreciative of her efforts, found himself wrestling with a lingering sense of betrayal. As autumn gave way to winter, the cold winds seemed to mirror the chill in their relationship. The couple, once inseparable, now coexisted in a state of uneasy truce. Conversations were polite but superficial, each avoiding the raw topics that lay just beneath the surface. Jan's pain had not subsided as he had hoped. Instead, it festered, a constant reminder of the chasm that had formed between them. The sight of Crystal, once a source of joy, now evoked a complex mix of love and hurt. He found himself retreating further into his work and his art, using them as shields against his emotions. Crystal, aware of the growing distance, felt a mounting sense of desperation. She longed to bridge the gap, to return to the closeness they once shared, but she was at a loss for how to mend the fractures in their marriage. The freedom she had sought now felt hollow, a poor substitute for the love and companionship she had jeopardized. The turning point came unexpectedly. Jan, after a particularly long and introspective night in his studio, made a decision that would change the course of their lives. He realized that he could no longer live in the shadow of Crystal's actions, that the trust they once shared was irreparably damaged. With a heavy heart, he drafted divorce papers, a tangible manifestation of his inner turmoil. He left them on the kitchen table one morning, a silent yet deafening statement of his pain and decision. Crystal found the papers later that day. The sight of them struck her like a physical blow. The reality of losing Jan, the prospect of their marriage ending, was a wake-up call like no other. She had never imagined her quest for freedom would lead to this, the dissolution of the very foundation of her life. In a frenzy of emotions, Crystal confronted Jan. "How could you?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were trying to work things out." Jan, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears, replied with a voice tinged with sorrow and resignation. "I've tried, Crystal, but the pain is too much. I can't live like this, always wondering, always hurting. I need to find peace, even if it means being apart." The conversation that followed was heart-wrenching. Crystal pleaded, promised change, but Jan's decision was firm. He needed to heal, to find himself again, away from the shadow of doubt and betrayal. In the days that followed, their home became a place of mourning, mourning for lost love, for broken trust, and for the life they once shared. Crystal was consumed with regret, realizing too late the true value of what she had risked in her pursuit of freedom. Jan, though resolute in his decision, grappled with a sense of loss. Letting go of Crystal, of their shared history, was the hardest thing he had ever done. But he believed it was necessary, a step towards healing the wounds that had been inflicted. As the chapter of their marriage drew to a close, both Crystal and Jan faced an uncertain future. The path ahead was unclear, filled with the daunting task of rebuilding their lives separately, each grappling with the fallout of decisions made and paths taken. In the aftermath of Jan's irrevocable decision, the house they had shared for over 2 decades felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Crystal moved through its rooms like a ghost, haunted by memories and stifled by regrets. The finality of the divorce papers had shattered her world, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life she barely recognized. Jan, meanwhile, was a silhouette of his former self. His decision to end the marriage, though necessary for his peace, weighed heavily on him. He had started to pack his belongings, each item a reminder of the life they had once so lovingly built together. The process was cathartic, but it was also a journey through a gauntlet of emotions. Crystal spent her days in a haze of reflection. The freedom she had so desperately sought now tasted bitter. She realized how blinded she had been by her own desires, failing to see the treasure she had in Jan and their marriage. The irony of her situation was not lost on her. In seeking to find herself, she had lost the most important part of her life. As the reality of her impending divorce sank in, Crystal began to confront the deeper issues that had led her down this path. She sought counseling, a step towards understanding her actions and healing the wounds she had inflicted on herself and Jan. Through this introspective journey, she began to grasp the complexities of her own heart, the unaddressed needs and fears that had driven her. Jan, on the other hand, found solace in his art, his canvas a witness to the turmoil within him. Each brushstroke was a step towards healing, a way to express the emotions he couldn't put into words. He also started to reconnect with old friends, slowly rebuilding the social life he had neglected during the turmoil of their marital strife. As the day of their final divorce hearing approached, both Crystal and Jan grappled with a myriad of emotions. There was sorrow for what was lost, guilt for what had been done, and a faint glimmer of hope for what the future might hold. In the courtroom, the finality of their divorce became a stark reality. As they stood before the judge, a respectful distance between them, they shared a poignant glance, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history, the love that had once bound them, and the sorrow of its ending. After the proceedings, Crystal approached Jan. "I am so sorry, Jan. For everything," she said, her voice a whisper of remorse. Jan looked at her, his eyes reflecting a complex mix of emotions. "I know, Crystal. I wish things could have been different. Take care of yourself." With those final words, they parted ways, stepping into their new lives apart. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Crystal, emerging from the courthouse, felt a sense of closure. The pain and regret would always be a part of her, but she also felt a burgeoning strength. She had learned a painful lesson about love, freedom, and the consequences of her choices. Now, it was time to rebuild, to forge a new path grounded in the wisdom gained from her shattered reflections. And so, they both walked away, their paths diverging, each carrying the lessons of their past as they stepped into the unknown future. After 17 years of marriage, the husband discovers a notification from a popular dating app on his wife's phone. The wife initially tries to deny and then breaks down, admitting to her infidelity. Marcus sat in the quiet of their once lively living room, a solitary figure amidst the shadows of dusk. The room, filled with memories of laughter and love, now echoed a silent story of change. He looked around, his eyes lingering on the photographs lining the mantel, snapshots of a marriage that spanned nearly 2 decades. As he gazed at a picture of Linda and himself smiling on a sun-kissed beach, a melancholic smile tugged at his lips. It was hard to believe that the vibrant, loving woman in those photos was the same person who had grown so distant from him. It had started subtly, so subtly that Marcus had initially brushed it off as the natural ebb and flow of marriage. Linda began working late more often, her phone constantly buzzing with new emails and messages. At first, Marcus was supportive, understanding the demands of her career. But as months rolled by, the late nights became more frequent, and the gap between them widened. Conversations over dinner turned from lively discussions about their day to monosyllabic exchanges. Marcus missed the warmth of her laughter and the spark in her eyes when she talked about her day. It felt like they were living parallel lives under the same roof. Marcus couldn't pinpoint exactly when the laughter had ceased, or when the warm, comfortable silences had turned cold. He remembered the small things, how Linda stopped asking for his opinion on her outfits, how she no longer reached for his hand during their evening walks. He had tried to bridge the gap, suggesting weekend getaways and date nights, but Linda always had an excuse. Too much work, too tired, maybe next weekend. He recalled the night he had tried to confront her about the growing distance. Linda had looked at him, her eyes a mixture of surprise and something he couldn't quite decipher. "It's just stress, Marcus. We're fine," she had said, her voice a little too even. Marcus wanted to believe her, to shake off the nagging feeling in his gut that something was amiss. So, he chose to believe her words, pushing his doubts to the back of his mind. But there were signs that he had chosen to ignore. The frequent buzzing of her phone late into the night, the sudden weekend work trips, the way she guarded her phone like a treasure chest. Marcus had convinced himself that it was all in his head, that 17 years of marriage couldn't just fade into indifference. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, Marcus realized that the signs had always been there, like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to piece together. It wasn't just about the distance or the late nights, it was the feeling of being with someone who was physically present but emotionally miles away. The realization weighed heavily on his heart, a mixture of sadness and an impending sense of loss. In the dim light of the room, Marcus understood that the change in their marriage wasn't abrupt. It was a slow, gradual drift, like two boats silently parting ways in the vast ocean. And it was in this quiet room, surrounded by the remnants of happier times, that Marcus braced himself for the inevitable storm that was about to hit their lives. Marcus awoke to the sound of his alarm, the morning light casting a soft glow across the room. He lay in bed for a moment, the weight of his realizations from the previous night heavy on his mind. Today, he decided, he would confront Linda. He needed answers, and more importantly, he needed the truth. As he went about his morning routine, Marcus's mind replayed their years together, searching for missed clues, moments that should have warned him. He made coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, but the comfort it usually brought him was absent today. He sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought, until he heard Linda's footsteps. "Good morning," Linda said, her voice betraying a hint of unease as she noticed the serious look on Marcus's face. "Morning," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Linda, we need to talk." Linda sat down across from him, her expression turning cautious. "What's wrong?" she asked. Marcus took a deep breath. "I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me." Is there someone else?" Linda's face paled. "What?" "No, of course not," she stammered, but her eyes darted away, unable to meet his gaze. Marcus pushed on, his voice firmer. "I saw a notification on your phone last night. From a dating app." Linda's expression crumbled, the facade of normalcy falling away. For a moment, there was silence, a painful, stretching silence. Then, with a shaky breath, Linda confessed. "Yes, there's someone else," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt his heart constrict, pain and disbelief swirling into a tempest of emotions. "How long?" he managed to ask, his voice strained. "A few months," Linda replied, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to happen, Marcus. It just did." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "A few months," he repeated, the words bitter in his mouth. "And all this time, what? You were just going to keep lying to me?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I was confused. I didn't know how to end it. I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" Marcus's voice rose in anger. "You think lying and cheating on me for months is somehow better?" Linda reached out a hand, but Marcus stepped back. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Marcus shook his head, a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal churning within him. "Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, Linda. How could you do this to us? To our marriage?" Linda had no answer, her sobs the only sound in the tense kitchen. Marcus turned and walked out of the room, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He needed space, he needed to think. As he left the house, he realized that their marriage, the life they had built together, was shattered. The trust and love he thought were unbreakable had been irreparably damaged. And as he walked aimlessly down the street, Marcus knew that nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house was suffocating, heavy with unspoken words and broken trust. Marcus moved through the rooms like a ghost, the walls echoing with the remnants of a happier past. Linda tried to talk to him, to explain, to apologize, but her words felt hollow, lost in the chasm that had opened between them. Marcus found himself oscillating between anger and despair. He struggled to reconcile the image of Linda, his wife of 17 years, with the person who had deceived him so completely. Every glance at her was a reminder of the betrayal, and every word she spoke grated against his wounded heart. Friends and family began to notice the strain. Marcus's sister, Julia, called him one evening, her voice laced with concern. "Marcus, you haven't been yourself lately. Is everything okay?" Marcus hesitated, then the words spilled out. He told Julia everything, about the dating app, Linda's affair, the confrontation. Julia listened in silence, her shock evident even through the phone. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," she finally said. "If there's anything I can do, just let me know." The offer was kind, but Marcus knew there was nothing anyone could do to mend what had been broken. Meanwhile, Linda was a mix of regret and desperation. She reached out to Marcus repeatedly, trying to bridge the gap with apologies and promises of change. But her attempts only served to push Marcus further away. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship was now a pile of rubble. One evening, as they sat in silence at the dinner table, Linda spoke up. "Marcus, can we try counseling? I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I want to make things right. I still love you." Marcus looked at her, the woman he had loved for so many years, now a stranger to him. "I don't know if love is enough anymore, Linda," he said quietly. The days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew. Conversations were brief and strained, each word loaded with the weight of their shattered relationship. Marcus spent more time at work, staying late to avoid the painful quiet of their home. When he was there, he and Linda moved around each other like two planets in decaying orbits, close but never touching. As the reality of their situation settled in, Marcus knew he had to make a decision. The love he had for Linda was now tinged with bitterness, the memories of their years together overshadowed by her betrayal. He thought about their vows, the promises they had made to each other. Those words, once sacred, now felt like a distant echo from another life. The pain of betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw to imagine a future together. With a heavy heart, Marcus realized that their marriage could not be salvaged. The trust that had been the cornerstone of their relationship was gone, and without it, there was nothing left to hold on to. As Marcus lay in bed one night, the decision clear in his mind, he felt a profound sense of loss. The end of their marriage was not just the end of their relationship but the death of the future they had planned together. And as he drifted into a restless sleep, Marcus mourned the loss of what had once been, and what could never be again. The autumn leaves had begun to turn, painting the world in shades of orange and red, a stark contrast to the grayness that had settled in Marcus's heart. The decision to end his marriage with Linda, once a distant thought, now loomed over him, unavoidable and necessary. Marcus sat at his desk, staring blankly at the papers in front of him. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in a web of memories, regrets, and what-ifs. The office noise around him faded into a dull buzz, insignificant against the turmoil within. He had to make the call, set things in motion. He picked up the phone and dialed the number he had been staring at for days now, a divorce attorney. The conversation was a blur of legal terms and procedural steps. Marcus answered the questions mechanically, feeling detached from the reality that his marriage was ending in a series of legal documents and signatures. Later that evening, he sat Linda down at the kitchen table, the same place where she had confessed her affair. "Linda, I've spoken to a divorce attorney. I think it's best for both of us," Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with sadness. Linda's face crumpled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Marcus, please, isn't there any way we can?" "No, Linda," Marcus interrupted, his heart heavy with grief and resolve. "I can't move past this. I've tried, but every time I look at you, I'm reminded of the betrayal. We're beyond fixing." The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings with attorneys and mediators. The process was clinical and impersonal, reducing their years of marriage to assets and liabilities. They divided their shared life with the precision of a scalpel, each item a reminder of a dream they once shared. As they went through the motions, Marcus watched Linda. She seemed to shrink with each passing day, her regret tangible in every hesitant step and lowered gaze. She tried several times to reach out, to apologize, to explain, but Marcus was past the point of wanting explanations. He needed closure, a clean break from the pain and the past. The divorce papers were a cold epitaph to their marriage. As Marcus signed his name, he felt a finality that was both freeing and deeply saddening. He was closing a chapter of his life that had once been filled with love and hope. The day came for Linda to move out. Marcus watched as she packed her belongings, each item a shared memory being tucked away. She moved slowly, almost as if hoping for a last-minute reprieve. Before she left, she turned to Marcus, her eyes searching his. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I never wanted to hurt you." Marcus nodded, the pain still too fresh for words. "Goodbye, Linda," was all he could manage. As Linda's car disappeared down the street, Marcus felt a sense of surreal emptiness. The house, once filled with their life together, now echoed with the silence of his solitude. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with moments of doubt and loneliness. But as he stood in the doorway, a cool breeze carrying the scent of autumn leaves, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. It was the end of his marriage, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A chance to heal, to rediscover himself, and to eventually find peace. The seasons changed, and with them, the world around Marcus transformed, but the void left by Linda's departure remained. The house, once a sanctuary of their love and dreams, now echoed with the silence of his solitude. In the quietness, Marcus often found himself walking through the rooms, each corner a repository of memories, each object a testament to a life they had woven together. As he sat in the living room, the winter sun casting long shadows on the floor, Marcus realized the depth of his loneliness. The finality of the divorce had brought a sense of closure, but it also opened a chasm of introspection. He pondered over the years with Linda, the good times overshadowed by the pain of betrayal. He wondered how he had missed the signs, how he could have been so blind to the growing distance between them. Linda's absence was palpable. Despite the pain she had caused, Marcus couldn't deny the void her absence left in his life. He missed the sound of her voice, the laughter they had shared, even the mundane routines of their daily lives. But with the loss came a slow, begrudging acceptance. He began to understand that their love, once strong and vibrant, had withered under the weight of unspoken grievances and unmet expectations. Marcus spent his days keeping busy, immersing himself in work, and reconnecting with old friends. Julia was a constant support, her presence a comforting reminder that he was not alone in this journey. They often talked about everything and nothing, Julia listening patiently as Marcus vented his frustrations, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. One evening, as they sat in his kitchen, Julia said, "You know, Marcus, it's okay to grieve what you've lost. But don't forget to look forward to what's ahead. You have a chance to rebuild your life, to find happiness again." Her words resonated with Marcus, a beacon of hope in the fog of his sadness. He realized that while the past could not be changed, the future was still his to shape. He began to envision a life beyond the shadows of his failed marriage, a life where he could find peace and perhaps, in time, love again. Marcus also learned of Linda's struggles through mutual acquaintances. She had moved into a small apartment, her life a stark contrast to the one they had shared. She was reportedly filled with remorse, her decision to venture into infidelity a source of deep regret. Marcus felt a twinge of pity for her, but he knew their paths had irrevocably diverged. Her journey of redemption was hers to walk, just as his journey of healing was his own. As winter melted into spring, Marcus found solace in the little things, the budding trees, the longer days, the simple routine of life. He started to explore new hobbies, joined a local book club, and even began planning a solo trip abroad. Each step, though small, was a step away from the pain and towards a new beginning. The story ends with Marcus standing in his garden on a crisp spring morning, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked around at the blooming flowers, the sky a canvas of soft blues and pinks. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns, but Marcus knew he was ready to face it. He had weathered the storm of betrayal and come out stronger, more resilient. And as he stood there, a gentle breeze playing with the leaves, Marcus realized that this was not just an end, but also a beginning. A beginning of a new chapter in his life, one where he could find happiness on his own terms. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in a long time, that excited him.
After 20 years of marriage, wife's cheating with new BF lead to its collapse. She is now overwhelmed with regret and left with nothing, seeking for forgiveness. Melissa sat in the dimly lit corner of her living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. She gazed out the window, lost in thought. Tonight, like many nights before, she found herself reflecting on the past, on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 20 years ago, Melissa and Carlo had promised each other forever. Those days had been filled with laughter, dreams, and a sense of adventure. She remembered the way Carlo's eyes sparkled with excitement as they planned their future together, the warmth of his hand in hers as they envisioned a life filled with love and happiness. But as the years passed, the sparkle had dimmed. Their conversations, once filled with eager anticipation for the future, had dwindled to mundane exchanges about groceries and bills. The vibrant colors of their early years together had faded into the monochrome of routine. Melissa longed for the passion they once shared, for the connection that seemed to have slipped away with the passing of time. Sighing, she turned away from the window and looked around the room. It was a beautiful house, a testament to the life they had built together, but it felt empty somehow, devoid of the warmth that once permeated its walls. Carlo was often late from work these days, and when he was home, his presence felt distant, as if his mind were miles away. Melissa couldn't remember the last time they had shared a meal without the distraction of phones or the TV. The silences, once comfortable and intimate, now hung heavy between them, filled with unspoken words and unresolved tensions. She missed the ease of their early years, the way they could talk for hours about everything and nothing at all. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, Melissa heard the front door open and close. Carlo was home. She listened to the familiar sounds of his footsteps, the rustling as he hung up his coat, the soft clink of his keys on the table. But tonight, these sounds didn't bring her the usual comfort. Instead, they were a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between them. Carlo entered the living room, offering a tired smile. "Hey," he said softly, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "Hi," Melissa replied, managing a small smile. They exchanged a few words about their day, the conversation superficial and strained. Melissa wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap that had formed between them, but she didn't know how. The words she longed to say remained unspoken, trapped behind a wall of fear and uncertainty. Later, as they prepared for bed in their shared yet lonely room, Melissa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness, the sense that something vital was missing from their lives. She loved Carlo, but love alone didn't seem to be enough anymore. Melissa turned to look at Carlo, his face peaceful in sleep. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his arm. He stirred but didn't wake. In that moment, Melissa made a decision. She needed more than this, more than the routine and the silence. She craved passion, excitement, something to break the monotony of their existence. As she drifted off to sleep, a plan began to form in her mind, a dangerous and thrilling idea. She didn't know it then, but that night marked the beginning of a journey that would change everything. It was the start of a path that would lead her away from the safety of her marriage and into the unknown, a path filled with both heartache and discovery. Melissa stepped into the bustling coffee shop, the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans enveloping her as she made her way to the counter. It was her escape, a small haven where she could lose herself in the hum of life around her. As she waited for her order, her gaze wandered over the crowd, landing on a man sitting alone at a corner table. He was absorbed in a book, his dark hair falling slightly over his forehead. There was something about him, a certain allure that Melissa couldn't quite place. With her coffee in hand, Melissa found a seat not too far from the mysterious stranger. She tried to focus on her own book, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Finally, as if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met. There was a brief moment of connection, a spark, before Melissa hastily looked away, her cheeks warming with a blush. Days turned into weeks, and the coffee shop became a regular part of Melissa's routine. Each visit brought with it the hope of seeing him again, and more often than not, he was there. Their exchanges began with polite nods and shy smiles, gradually evolving into small talk. His name was Chris, and he had a way of speaking that made Melissa feel like she was the only person in the room. Chris was different from anyone Melissa had known. He was adventurous, speaking passionately about his travels and experiences. He listened intently when she spoke, making her feel heard in a way she hadn't felt in years. With every conversation, Melissa found herself more drawn to him, a feeling of excitement growing inside her. One rainy afternoon, as they shared a table, Chris's hand brushed against hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her. He apologized with a smile, but neither of them moved their hands away. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. As they left the coffee shop together, Chris invited Melissa for a walk. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and the streets glistening. They walked side by side, talking and laughing, the city around them fading into a blur. Melissa felt alive, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The walk led them to a quiet park, where they sat on a bench under a canopy of trees. The conversation turned more personal, and Melissa found herself opening up about her life, her marriage, and the loneliness she felt. Chris listened, his eyes never leaving hers, and in that moment, Melissa felt a connection deeper than she had ever experienced with Carlo. As the evening drew to a close, Chris walked Melissa to her car. There was a moment of hesitation, a silent question hanging in the air between them. Then, impulsively, Chris leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle, tentative kiss, but it set off a fire inside Melissa. She drove home that night, her mind racing with thoughts of Chris. She knew what she was doing was dangerous, a betrayal of her marriage. But the excitement and passion she felt with Chris were intoxicating. She was drawn to him, like a moth to a flame, and she couldn't resist the urge to see him again. As Melissa lay in bed that night, she realized that her life was about to change. She was standing at a crossroads, and the path she was about to take was fraught with risk and uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, she felt alive, and she knew there was no turning back. The world outside Melissa's window was bathed in the golden hues of early autumn, but the beauty of the season couldn't penetrate the turmoil brewing inside her. Over the past few weeks, her clandestine meetings with Chris had evolved into a whirlwind of emotion and passion. Each stolen moment with him was a sharp contrast to her life with Carlo, a life that now felt more distant than ever. Melissa clung to the exhilaration of her affair with Chris, a lifeline in the sea of her monotonous routine. Their conversations, their laughter, the way he looked at her, it all made her feel desired and alive. But beneath the surface of these euphoric meetings, a nagging doubt began to grow, a whispering fear that what she was doing was not only wrong but perilously fragile. Then, the unexpected happened. The text messages from Chris became less frequent, his responses shorter. The long, engaging conversations they once had were replaced by polite, non-committal exchanges. Melissa felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. Something was changing, and she couldn't deny it. One chilly evening, as they sat in their usual spot at the coffee shop, the air between them felt charged with unspoken words. Chris's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his usual enthusiasm seemed forced. Melissa's heart raced with apprehension as she broached the subject. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris hesitated, then looked away. "I've been thinking," he started, his words slow and deliberate. "We've had fun, Melissa, but I think it's time we both moved on." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. She felt her world tilt, the ground beneath her shifting. "Moved on," she echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. Chris nodded, avoiding her gaze. "I'm not looking for anything serious, and I think it's best we end this before it gets too complicated." Too complicated. The phrase echoed in Melissa's mind, a cruel reminder of the reality she had chosen to ignore. She had risked everything for this affair, for the feeling of being wanted, and now she was left with nothing but the bitter taste of rejection. The drive home was a blur. Melissa's thoughts were a chaotic mix of anger, shame, and heartache. She had been so consumed by the excitement of her affair with Chris that she hadn't seen the truth. It was never going to last. She had allowed herself to believe in the illusion of a new beginning, only to have it shatter into pieces. Sitting alone in the dark, Melissa realized the full extent of what she had done. She had jeopardized her marriage, betrayed Carlo, for a fleeting romance that had left her more alone than ever. The weight of her choices pressed down on her, a burden she could no longer ignore. That night, as she lay in bed next to Carlo, Melissa felt the distance between them more acutely than ever. She turned to look at him, his features softened in sleep, and felt a surge of regret. In her pursuit of something more, she had lost sight of what she already had. Melissa knew that the days ahead would be filled with difficult decisions and painful truths. She would have to confront the consequences of her actions and face the reality of a life that was forever altered. The illusion had shattered, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life she had once cherished. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room where Melissa lay awake, her thoughts a turbulent sea. The aftermath of her affair with Chris weighed heavily on her, each moment a reminder of her betrayal. She knew she couldn't keep this secret buried. The truth was a specter haunting her every step. After Carlo left for work, the silence of the house echoed the turmoil in Melissa's heart. The walls that had witnessed 2 decades of their life together now stood as silent judges to her infidelity. With a heavy heart, Melissa realized that the time had come to face the consequences of her actions. Today, she would confess everything to Carlo. As the clock ticked towards evening, Melissa's anxiety grew. She rehearsed her confession 1,000 times, yet the right words eluded her. How could she explain the unexplainable? How could she justify the unjustifiable? Her heart raced as she heard Carlo's car pull into the driveway. Carlo entered the house, his face weary from the day's work. He smiled at Melissa, a routine gesture, unaware of the storm brewing. After dinner, as they sat in the living room, Melissa's hands trembled. The moment had arrived. "Carlo, we need to talk," she began, her voice barely a whisper. Carlo turned to her, his expression changing from tired contentment to concern. "What's wrong?" he asked. Melissa took a deep breath. "I've done something terrible," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I had an affair." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Carlo's face drained of color, his eyes reflecting a mix of shock, hurt, and disbelief. "An affair," he echoed, his voice a mix of pain and anger. "With whom? Why?" Melissa recounted the story, her words tumbling out in a flood of regret and sorrow. She told him about Chris, about the loneliness and longing that had driven her to seek solace in someone else's arms. She spoke of her guilt and the realization of her mistake. Carlo listened in silence, his face a mask of stoic hurt. When Melissa finished, the room was heavy with the weight of her confession. Carlo stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "I need some time to process this," he said, his voice hollow. He walked out of the room, leaving Melissa alone with her guilt and fear. That night, the house felt colder, emptier. Melissa lay in bed, the space next to her a stark reminder of the rift that now lay between them. She had confessed, but the catharsis she had hoped for was replaced by a deep sense of loss. She realized that her confession was not just an admission of guilt, but also an acknowledgement of the potential end of her marriage. In the days that followed, Carlo and Melissa lived like strangers under the same roof. Conversations were brief and functional, the emotional chasm between them widening with each passing day. Melissa grappled with the consequences of her actions, the reality of potentially losing Carlo forever a constant shadow. As Melissa faced each day, she understood the arduous journey of redemption that lay ahead. She had shattered the trust that was the foundation of their marriage, and now she had to face the daunting task of rebuilding it, piece by painstaking piece. The road ahead was uncertain, but Melissa knew that whatever the outcome, she had to face it with courage and honesty. The ruins of her actions lay before her, and it was time to confront them, no matter how painful the process. The world outside continued its relentless march forward, but within the walls of the home that once symbolized love and unity, time seemed to have come to a painful standstill. Melissa moved through her days in a daze, each moment steeped in regret and sorrow. The house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with the silence of a love lost. Carlo, though still present in body, had become a ghost of the man he once was. His eyes, which used to light up at the sight of Melissa, now glanced past her, cold and distant. Conversations were strained, limited to necessities, the warmth that once defined their interactions replaced by a chill that permeated the air. Melissa's confession, rather than bringing relief, had unleashed a torrent of pain and guilt that she struggled to navigate. She had hoped for forgiveness, for a chance to rebuild the shattered pieces of their marriage, but as days turned into weeks, it became clear that some breaks were beyond repair. Her affair with Chris, once a thrilling escape, now haunted her as the biggest mistake of her life. The memories of their time together, which used to bring her joy, now served as a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Chris had moved on, leaving Melissa to grapple with the fallout of their brief liaison. As she wandered through the empty rooms of her house, Melissa was struck by the profound sense of loss that enveloped her. Photographs on the walls, souvenirs of happier times, seemed to mock her with their frozen smiles. The future she had once envisioned with Carlo, filled with love and companionship, had dissolved into a distant dream. Melissa's attempts to reach out to Carlo, to bridge the chasm between them, were met with polite indifference. The man she had loved for 2 decades, the father of her children, had become a stranger, his heart closed off to her apologies and pleas for reconciliation. The realization that she had irrevocably damaged the most important relationship in her life was a burden too heavy to bear. Melissa's nights were sleepless, her mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and if-onlys. She replayed their last happy moments over and over, wishing she could turn back time, make different choices. Her friends and family, aware of the situation, offered support and counsel, but Melissa found little comfort in their words. The pain she had inflicted on Carlo, on her family, was a wound that she alone had to bear. In the solitude of her heartache, Melissa came to understand the true cost of her actions. She had sought excitement, a break from the monotony of her marriage, but in doing so, she had lost everything that truly mattered. Her affair had not been a new beginning but an end to a chapter of her life that she now desperately wished she could rewrite. As the reality of her new life without Carlo settled in, Melissa was consumed by a deep sense of regret. She had thought she was seeking happiness, but in her pursuit, she had destroyed the very foundation of her joy. The echoes of her choices reverberated through her empty home, a constant reminder of the love she had forsaken. Melissa's story was not one of redemption or rebuilding, but a somber tale of loss and the enduring consequences of a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a lesson in the fragility of trust and the irrevocable nature of certain choices. As she gazed out of her window at the world moving on without her, Melissa was left with nothing but the echoes of her regret, a haunting melody of what could have been. An established wealthy family took custody of my young son following the death of my husband, leaving me with only monthly visits to see him. But there is a hope. In the soft glow of the early morning, Justine sat alone at the kitchen table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of a half-empty coffee cup. The house was silent, a stark contrast to the bustling warmth it used to emanate. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral, 3 weeks since Hector had been cruelly snatched away by fate's indifferent hand, leaving behind a void that seemed to consume everything around her. Justine's gaze drifted to the small, framed photo on the mantel, Hector, with his easy smile and eyes that always seemed to hold a secret joke. They had built a modest but happy life together, their love a steady flame that had weathered many storms. But this storm was different. It had extinguished that flame, leaving Justine to navigate a dark, unfamiliar path alone. The sound of light footsteps broke her reverie. It was Lucas, their 8-year-old son, his hair tousled from sleep, clutching a threadbare teddy bear Hector had won for him at a carnival. Justine forced a smile, masking her sorrow. "Morning, sunshine," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "Morning, Mom," Lucas mumbled, rubbing his eyes. He climbed onto the chair next to her, his presence a bittersweet reminder of what they had lost and what she still had to fight for. They went through the motions of breakfast, a routine that felt hollow without Hector's laughter filling the room. Justine kept up a brave front, chattering about trivial things, but her heart wasn't in it. Lucas seemed to sense her distress, his young face etched with a confusion and sadness far beyond his years. After breakfast, as Lucas settled in front of the TV, Justine retreated to the solitude of her bedroom. The room still bore Hector's imprint, his books on the nightstand, his watch on the dresser. She picked it up, feeling its weight, a tangible reminder of the life they had shared. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back. She had to be strong for Lucas. The doorbell rang, slicing through the heavy silence. Justine composed herself and went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a man and a woman, dressed in expensive suits, their faces somber. They introduced themselves as representatives of the Delacroix family, Hector's family. Justine felt a surge of resentment. The Delacroix were wealthy, influential people, the kind who lived in a world far removed from her own. Hector had been estranged from them for years. His decision to marry a woman of modest means a point of contention that had never been resolved. "We're here about Lucas," the woman said, her tone polite but distant. "We believe it's in his best interest to come live with us. We can provide opportunities you cannot." Justine's heart pounded in her chest. This was what she had feared since Hector's passing, that his family would come for Lucas. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Lucas is my son. He stays with me." The representatives exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "We hope to settle this amicably, Mrs. Delacroix. But if you refuse, we're prepared to take legal action." As they left, Justine closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. She knew she was no match for the Delacroix family's wealth and power. But Lucas was all she had left of Hector, and she would fight with every breath in her body to keep him. The days following the Delacroix' visit were a blur for Justine. Her mind was a tumult of fear and defiance, a constant replay of their cold words. They wanted Lucas, her little boy, her last connection to Hector. She couldn't let that happen. Justine knew she was David facing Goliath. The Delacroix had resources she couldn't dream of. But she had something stronger, a mother's love, and the memory of Hector's unwavering belief in standing for what was right. She sought legal counsel, though her options were limited. The lawyer she could afford was sympathetic but realistic. "I won't lie to you, Justine. This will be tough. They have money, influence. But I promise to do everything I can," he said, his eyes kind but worried. Meanwhile, life had to go on. Justine juggled her job at the local library with caring for Lucas, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Each evening, she would sit with Lucas, helping him with his homework, reading stories, or just talking. She noticed the change in him. The once lively and chatty boy was now quiet, his moments of joy fewer. The court date loomed like a dark cloud. Justine prepared as best as she could, gathering every piece of evidence and testimony that showcased her loving, stable home. Friends and colleagues wrote letters of support, speaking to her character and her devotion to Lucas. On the day of the hearing, Justine felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but smart dress, a world away from the expensive suits of the Delacroix legal team. The courtroom was intimidating, the air thick with tension. The Delacroix were there, their faces masks of polite indifference. Justine caught a glimpse of Lucas, brought in by a social worker. He looked small and scared. Her heart ached. The proceedings were a blur. The Delacroix lawyers painted a picture of a world where Lucas would have the best of everything: education, opportunities, a life of privilege. They questioned Justine's ability to provide for Lucas, subtly hinting at her modest income and single-parent status. When it was her turn, Justine spoke from the heart. She talked about Lucas, their life together, the love and stability she provided. She spoke of Hector, their shared dreams for their son. Her voice wavered but didn't break. As the judge announced a recess before the verdict, Justine felt drained. She had given it her all, but was it enough against the might of the Delacroix? Back at home, waiting for the call, Justine held Lucas close, reading his favorite book until he fell asleep in her arms. She watched him sleep, his face peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her heart. The phone rang late in the evening. It was her lawyer. The verdict was in. Her heart sank as she listened. Despite her best efforts, the court had ruled in favor of the Delacroix. Custody of Lucas would be transferred to them. The world seemed to spin around her. She had lost. Lost the legal battle, lost Hector, and now she was losing Lucas. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would keep fighting, in any way she could. Lucas was her son, and she would never let go without a fight. The days following the court's decision were a nightmare for Justine. Her house, once filled with the sounds of Lucas's laughter and chatter, felt hauntingly silent. Each corner echoed memories of a life that was being ripped away from her. The legal battle had drained her, both emotionally and financially, but it was the loss of Lucas that was unbearable. Justine's friends and family rallied around her, offering support and comfort, but their words were mere whispers in the storm of her grief. She felt a profound sense of injustice. How could a system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable wrench a child away from a loving mother based solely on financial status? The day Lucas was to leave with the Delacroix arrived too soon. Justine tried to be brave, to smile for Lucas, but her heart was shattering. She packed his things, each item a reminder of the life they shared. His favorite books, the photo album filled with pictures of him and Hector, his little backpack. She slipped a small toy Hector had given him into the bag, a silent message to her son to remember his father and the love they all shared. Lucas was quiet, his young face etched with confusion and sadness. Justine knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. "You are the strongest, bravest boy I know," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Remember, no matter what, Mommy loves you more than anything in the world. And Daddy is watching over us, always." The Delacroix arrived, their car a sleek symbol of the world they belonged to. They were polite, their smiles practiced. Justine couldn't bring herself to trust those smiles. She held Lucas tightly one last time, whispering words of love and courage, then handed him over to his new guardians. Watching the car drive away, a piece of Justine's soul went with it. She stood there long after the car had disappeared, lost in her grief. In the weeks that followed, Justine tried to reach out to Lucas. The Delacroix allowed her phone calls, but they were brief and monitored. Lucas's voice was always hesitant, his lively spirit dimmed. Justine ached to hold him, to tell him everything would be all right, but she couldn't. She fought through her days, her job at the library a welcome distraction, but the nights were long and lonely. Justine lay awake, replaying every moment of the court case, wondering if there was something more she could have done. As the 1-month mark approached, Justine prepared for her first visit with Lucas. The court had granted her 1 day a month with him. It was a small consolation, a mere drop in the ocean of her loss, but she clung to it. The day of the visit, Justine arrived early at the designated meeting place, a sterile room in a government building. Her heart raced as she waited. When Lucas finally walked in, escorted by a social worker, he looked different, his clothes more formal, his hair neatly combed. But his smile, when he saw her, was the same. They spent the day together, playing games and talking. Lucas spoke of his new life, his words careful. Justine listened, her heart aching. She could sense the change in him, the subtle molding of his personality to fit into the Delacroix world. As the day ended, and she hugged Lucas goodbye, promising to see him next month, Justine felt a renewed determination. She might have lost the legal battle, but she would not lose her son. Not truly. She would fight in every way she could to remain a part of his life, to remind him of the love they shared, a love no court ruling could ever diminish. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Each day was a reminder of the void that Lucas's absence had left in Justine's life. She maintained a brave front at work and in public, but in the solitude of her home, her grief was palpable, a constant companion in the echoing silence. Justine found herself in a routine that was both a comfort and a curse. Work at the library offered a semblance of normality, but returning home to an empty house was a daily struggle. The photographs of Lucas and Hector, which once brought joy, now served as a stark reminder of her loss. She would often find herself lost in these memories, the laughter and love they shared playing like a movie in her mind. Her monthly visits with Lucas were both her lifeline and her heartache. She would count down the days, preparing for each visit with a mix of eagerness and dread. The meetings were bittersweet, a few precious hours in which she could hold her son, talk to him, and try to bridge the growing gap in their lives. Lucas was changing. Each visit, Justine noticed subtle differences, the way he spoke, his mannerisms, even his interests. The Delacroix influence was evident, molding him into a version of themselves. It pained Justine to see these changes, yet she couldn't deny the advantages he was receiving: the best schools, extracurricular activities, and travels to places she could only dream of showing him. Despite this, their bond remained strong. Lucas would light up during their visits, his laughter and energy filling the room. They would play games, read books, and Justine would listen intently as he shared stories about his new life. She treasured these moments, holding on to them long after Lucas had left. But the reality of their situation was never far from her mind. The Delacroix were courteous but distant during the exchanges, always reminding Justine of her limited role in her son's life now. They had set boundaries, and she was painfully aware of the consequences should she overstep them. The emotional toll was immense. Justine often found herself at Hector's grave, talking to him about their son, seeking solace in the memories of their time together. She wondered what Hector would say, how he would feel about the life Lucas was being forced into. She missed his guidance, his strength, and most of all, his understanding. Her friends and family remained supportive, encouraging her to keep fighting. But Justine's fight was no longer in the courtroom, it was in maintaining her connection with Lucas, ensuring he never forgot where he came from, the love they shared, and the father who would always be a part of him. In the quiet moments alone, Justine would plan for the next visit, each one a small victory in the battle she was waging. She held on to hope, however faint, that one day things might change, that she could once again be a full-time mother to her son. But for now, she lived for those monthly visits, each one a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost and what she still had to hold on to. Her love for Lucas was unwavering, a beacon in the darkness, guiding her through each day until she could see him again. Months turned into years, and the once painful routine of monthly visits became a bittersweet normalcy in Justine's life. Each visit with Lucas was a day she cherished, a brief respite in the otherwise relentless march of days. She watched Lucas grow from a boy into a young man, his features maturing, his personality shaped by a world so different from the one she could have given him. On the eve of what would have been Lucas's 10th visit since the court's decision, Justine found herself restless. She sat in Lucas's old room, now a shrine to his childhood, untouched since he left. The walls adorned with superhero posters, a shelf filled with an array of toys and books they used to read together, and his drawings still pinned to the corkboard. It was a capsule of memories, both painful and precious. The next day, Justine waited at the usual government building, her heart pounding with the familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. When Lucas arrived, she barely recognized him. Gone was the little boy with wide, curious eyes. In his place stood a young teenager, tall and poised, his mannerisms refined. Despite this, his smile when he saw her was the same, lighting up his face with genuine warmth. Their conversations had evolved over the years. No longer about toys and cartoons, they now spoke about Lucas's school, his friends, and his aspirations. He talked about his travels with the Delacroix, the places he had seen, and the experiences he had. Justine listened, a proud but aching heart, happy for his opportunities but saddened by the shared moments they had lost. During their lunch, Lucas's demeanor shifted. He seemed hesitant, as if wrestling with a thought. Finally, he looked up at Justine, his eyes holding a seriousness beyond his years. "Mom," he started, his voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately. About you. About who I am." Justine's heart skipped a beat. "Lucas, you can talk to me about anything, you know that." "I know," he said, fidgeting with his napkin. "It's just, sometimes, I feel like I don't belong there, with the Delacroix. I mean, they're nice and all, but it's not home." The words hit Justine like a wave. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she fought them back. "Lucas, you'll always have a home with me. No matter what, you are my son, and you are your father's son. We may not have their wealth, but we have something no money can buy. We have love, our memories, our bond." Lucas nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I know, Mom. It's just hard, you know? I wish things were different." Justine reached across the table, taking his hand. "I know, my love. But remember, no matter where you are, what you're doing, we're always connected. You're not alone." Their day together passed too quickly, as it always did. As she hugged Lucas goodbye, she whispered, "You have the best of both worlds in you, Lucas. Never forget that." Lucas hugged her back tightly. "I won't, Mom. I love you." As Justine watched him leave, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Their bond, tested and strained, had not broken. It had evolved, grown stronger in its own way. She knew their journey was far from over, but as long as they had their love, they would endure whatever came their way. She looked forward to their next visit, and the many more to come, holding on to the belief that one day, they could be together again, not just as mother and son, but as a family.